Welcome to the terrible trifecta of climate, COVID, and food. Our global population is increasing simultaneously to our planet warming. These dual trends, alongside risky human behaviors like wet markets and wildlife trade, are increasing the risk of infectious disease outbreaks like COVID-19. If we do not proactively prepare against further habitat encroach, deforestation, and interaction with wild animals, our collective global situation will exponentially worsen. We need bold solutions that commensurate to the reality of the risk we face as a collective global populace. This panel breaks down the silos across celebrity, activism, medical science, and public health, food, nutrition, and behavioral science. It takes diverse, varied perspectives across a broad section of our society to drive behavioral change with real consequences, particularly in how we engage with the food we eat. It can be done and requires all hands on deck. My name is Jin Yu. I'm your moderator, 3X Tech Startup founder, angel investor, and advisor. I have a deep passion for conversation that can spark action, community, and galvanize resources into actionable results. Also, I'm a 20-year vegetarian. We are joined by Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, who is a risk and behavioral scientist, US representative of We Don't Have Time, correspondent for multiple publications, book author, globally recognized keynote speaker, and is regularly interviewed on global media outlets such as CNN and the BBC. We're also joined by Dr. Michael Greger, a founding member and fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. Greger, MD, is a physician, New York Times bestselling author, and internationally recognized speaker on nutrition. He's got videos on more than 2,000 health topics freely available at nutritionfacts.org. We also have Jiliian Seamaan, who's the director of food and environment at Earth Day Network, where she focuses on addressing the impact animal and industrial agriculture have on the planet. She's a fierce advocate for both human and planetary health, focusing on solutions like plant-based diets, regenerative agriculture, and sustainability. Finally, Moby, who needs no introduction, but I'll give one anyway, is an American musician, songwriter, singer, producer, animal rights activist who sold 20 million records worldwide, widely considered to be amongst the most important dance music figures of our generation. Moby's also known for his veganism and support for animal welfare and humanitarian aid. So let's kick this off without any further ado. Dr. Sweta, can you synthesize for us the relationship between climate, COVID, and food?
So that's the thing, right? We don't think of these three things together. We're not wired to think of these three things together. To think about disease in the same bucket as food, in the same bucket as our environment changing, that's a lot for our brains to handle. And if you think back to how came together as a species and started developing communities and setting up societies, we didn't need to worry about any of this stuff. It wasn't until we really changed the landscape that we interacted with one another and with the environment and with the animals that we began to recognize that there were increasing risks being associated that traditionally we never were that concerned about. For the longest time, all we really had to worry about was making sure we didn't fall into the pathway of a snake or a tiger and just stick to our tribe, make it to 30 years old, hopefully procreate and just continue the gene, right? So we just haven't had our brains evolve quickly enough to address the reality of the complex, interconnected global landscape that we now reside in. And it is very interconnected. And that's something we have to take into account when we think forward towards solutions. Every decision we make, the choices that we make, not just as ourselves and in our communities, but those who we've elected in to represent us, have to be thinking towards the future. It can't just be the here and now, because it's the proactive preparedness that is going to prevent, for example, the next pandemic. It is decisions around food choices and the sources of those foods. And it's decisions around energy consumption and where we actually set up our next community. Is it going to be on a coastal line that is vulnerable to sea level rise? All of these things are interconnected, and we really need to think about them together. But again, because we just aren't wired that way, we've fallen short in doing so. And we have to remember that the more our population grows and the more that the planet continues to warm, even with our best efforts, right? We are still on the trend of increasing people on the planet and increasing warming that we are locked into no matter what. So those two things together means that there will be increased habitat encroachment, deforestation, and interaction with wild animals, and increasingly a demand for those products. So we need to nip that in the bud before it goes any further, because we see once we start engaging with the environment in an unnatural way, we see the emergence of these kinds of viruses like COVID-19. And once these viruses are out, they ground our collective worlds to a screeching halt. So rather than trying to figure out how to solve the problem after the fact and put the genie back in the bottle, if you will, we need to be proactive to prevent a type of COVID-19 from coming out in the first place. So let's make better food choices. Let's interact with animals in the natural environment in a way that doesn't make it more likely for infectious disease to emerge. And let's remember that these trends are not going anywhere. So we really need to hold ourselves and our decision makers accountable.
Wonderfully well said, so profound. Speaking of infectious diseases, Dr. Michael, what is the origin of COVID-19 and why isn't this a one-off event? Perhaps touch on zoonotic disease transfer?
Over the last few decades, human pathogens have emerged at a rate unprecedented in human history. So wait a second, emerged from where? Mostly from animals, the so-called zoonotic transmission. The AIDS virus is blamed on the butchering of primates in the bushmeat trade in Africa. Mad cow disease was because we turned, natural herbivores like cows into carnivores and cannibals. SARS and COVID-19 have been traced back to the exotic wild animal trade. But our last pandemic, swine flu in 2009, arose not from some, backwater, Asian wet market, but was largely made in the USA on pig operations in the United States. Thankfully, swine flu only killed about 500,000 people, but the next time we might not be so lucky. As devastating as COVID-19 has been, it may just be a dress rehearsal for an even greater threat waiting in the wings of chickens. According to the CDC, the leading candidate for the next pandemic after COVID-19 is a bird flu virus by the name of H7N9, which is 100 times deadlier than COVID-19. Instead of 1 in 250 cases dying, H7N9 has killed more than 40% of the people it infects. But the good news is there's something we can do about it. Just as, eliminating the exotic animal trade and live animal markets may go a long way towards preventing the next coronavirus pandemic, reforming the way we raise domestic animals for food may help forestall the next killer flu.
Thank you for that. Jiliian Seamaan, we've talked about food. Let's get into agriculture. What has been the role of big agriculture in contributing to climate change and its ripple effects, like increased disease outbreaks?
Yes, well, that's how much time do you have? So animal and industrial agriculture, it's a significant contributor to the climate crisis. It's one of the greatest contributors next to fossil fuels. Agriculture alone accounts for about 40% of the land we occupy and 70% of the water we consume. And food production often goes hand in hand with water pollution, deforestation, and loss of wildlife biodiversity. And by contributing to global warming or climate change, these agricultural emissions propel a cycle where it will be more and more difficult to reliably grow food to nourish everyone. How we've farmed has been detrimental to both human and planetary health. From herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers, we have to take a closer look to what's being sprayed on our foods and what's causing soil degradation. We need to take a closer look at our chemicals like glyphosate and atrazine that are used in our agricultural systems that are linked to serious diseases like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Also, what's happening, we're experiencing more extreme weather events now than ever before, and our agricultural systems are not ready for it. We must be resilient to flooding, to droughts, and to other anomalies in order to be able to feed the population. I used to work for the USDA, and I know firsthand that corn, barley, oats, and sorghum are all used as major feed grains in the United States, with corn accounting for more than 95% of our total feed grain and production use. What's really interesting is that soy is also commonly used in feed with 75% of global soybean crops being fed to livestock alone. A lot of what we're growing is really used to feed livestock. And, I often ask the question is how, we're so quick to be able to feed 70 billion farm animals, but we have such a hunger issue within humans. And why is that? And Sweta and Dr. Greger both talked about, intensive animal agriculture can spark the next pandemic. I mean, just to touch on it a little bit, but it's really creating a petri dish for pathogens to be able to mutate and spread. And we have to take a closer look at what's happening, the expansion of farms into previously wild areas that are used for domestic species. We need to take a closer look at farm concentration, at global live animal trade, as Dr. Greger mentioned, and live animal markets. If we continue down this path of intensive animal agriculture, we will continue to have outbreaks. There's no doubt that that'll continuously happen.
Wonderful insights. Thank you. Thank you, Jillian. Moby, you are a musician, but you've been quoted on Sweta's podcast, Risky Behavior, as saying you use your celebrity status to draw attention to your real passion, the plight of animals and the role of big agriculture in devastating the planet. As a lifelong animal rights activist and environmentalist, what do you want to see change?
Well, it's a great question. And it really is, it speaks to individual human behavior and collective human behavior, meaning what actually precipitates change. Because as we know, when people are confronted with rational evidence, they don't do anything. Sadly, it's almost just the way our brains are wired. Like our prefrontal cortex, when that's engaged, when we can be rational and have executive functioning, oftentimes we don't make changes. Just look at addicts, and I say that as a recovered or recovering addict. Like I knew for years that alcohol and drugs were destroying me, but they were familiar and I loved them. It was only when the consequences became so dire that I had to become sober. And so myself, everyone, all the activists, we have worked under the assumption for the longest time that when people are finally confronted with the information, they will change. Guess what? That's not how it works. There needs to be visceral, empirical, firsthand evidence that's usually quite egregious in order to compel people to change. So, obviously some people will reduce, they'll buy an electric car, they'll buy some nice light bulbs, they'll reduce the amount of animal products they're consuming, they'll make some slight changes, but with 7 or 8 billion of us, there needs to be collective mass, individual and institutional change. And unfortunately, I really sadly think that the only thing that's going to compel that change is catastrophe, or catastrophe or self-interest. If we can convince people that, which is the truth, that, by perhaps going vegan or going largely vegan, they will live longer, be more attractive, have a better future for their children, avoid cancer, diabetes, heart disease, have better erections, etc. Maybe self-interest can supplant the utility for catastrophe. But when you look at historical precedent, unfortunately, catastrophe is the only thing that compels true change.
Yeah, wonderful thoughts. We as humanity, we do tend to wait for a catastrophe rather than being proactive. Dr. Sweta, how could we use communication to effectively move individual behavior and policy from reactive to proactive, which I think Moby was kind of hinting at, and why is this important?
It's so important because of all the things Moby just said, right? We can't wait for that catastrophe. We live on a shared planet. We have a shared contract with one another. And if we don't make proactive efforts to stave off the worst case scenarios of climate change, the most vulnerable are going to suffer. We can see it in Texas, what happened recently with the Texas grid failure. Who is really getting hurt the most from it? It's those who have been historically disenfranchised and those minority communities that are most vulnerable. And what are we willing to see that on a global scale? So if the answer is no, because you buy into the fact that we are in this global shared contract, then we have to change how we think about this and be more proactive from individual level all the way up to those policymakers and decision makers who have the power to make moves, not just across various diplomatic tools, but to find the finance mechanisms to support that. And it's a big lift. I'm aware that we're asking for some serious mobilization. And that's what Moby was saying, is that we need that level of mobilization. And we can't wait for a disaster to occur. Now, what we can do, based on how we know what we know about human nature, is we can make some of these seemingly far away impacts that appear to be slow moving and not impacting us and the other more relevant to each and every individual on this planet, because we know that the ripple effects of climate change don't respect or care about arbitrary political borders. Infectious disease can emerge from anywhere, and it doesn't mind that there is an airport TSA officer blocking its way into another country. That's not how it works. So recognizing the fact that nobody is immune to being impacted by the ripple effects of climate change is a start. So we have to communicate that these are issues that are still relevant, even if they appear to be slow moving or far away. And once we can tell that story and craft that narrative, we can get some more mobilization at the ground level and ultimately see that trickle up. And at the same time, demand of our politicians to make the efforts and hold them accountable to prevent those worst case scenarios. Because again, how much are we as a global populace willing to allow in terms of suffering? We are locked in to some sort of warming, but we can get off the path to catastrophic warming. We still have the power to do that. And we can literally quantify the amount of lives saved if we make proactive preparation for it now.
Wonderful words. Thank you, Dr. Sweta. Dr. Michael, with that said, what are maybe some optimal food choices we can make to address both COVID and climate?
You know, well, as Jillian said, when we overcrowd thousands of animals in these cramped, filthy football field-sized sheds to lie beak to beak or snout to snout atop their own waist, it's just a breeding ground for disease. They're the ones that could use a little social distancing right now, right? The sheer numbers of animals, the overcrowding, the stress crippling their immune systems, the ammonia from the decomposing waste burning their lungs, the lack of fresh air, the lack of sunlight. Put all these factors together, what you have is really kind of a perfect storm environment for the emergence and spread of these so-called super strains of influenza. So what we need to do is heed the advice of the American Public Health Association, the largest and oldest association of public health professionals in the world, and declare a moratorium on factory farming, as well as having private industry help innovate us out of this precarious situation by making plant-based meat alternatives, or even cultivated meat, where you basically home brew meat from scratch from muscle cells, both of which, plant-based and cultivated meat, would be much less energy intensive, water intensive, land intensive, and carry zero pandemic risk. The bottom line is that it's not worth risking the lives of millions of people for the sake of cheaper chicken.
That's really interesting. Factory farming, the overcrowding, the ammonia, the methane, so many issues that you bring up, very profound. Jillian, what do we need to see urgently change in the food and agriculture landscape to curb carbon emissions?
So the only way to keep global warming below the 2 degrees Celsius threshold is to drastically reduce GHGs, partly by changing, or mostly actually, by changing the way we use our land and we produce our food. We need to adopt regenerative and holistic farming techniques that are able to sequester carbon, increase soil health, and reduce fossil fuel use. We need to stop using the herbicides, the pesticides, the fertilizers that are so intensive, that have degraded our soils for so long. The scientists at the FAO have said that if we continue on this trajectory, we're going to have less than 60 harvests left. And 60 harvests left, to think about, is not a lot. That is not a lot of time for us to be able to feed the world. So we really have to look at our practices. We have to look at how we're tilling. We need to move from the tillage that we're using now to moving to no tillage, or very minimal, depending on where you are, because some places they can't go to no tilling just because the soil is very hard. We need to look at biodiversity. We need to look at cover crops. We need to farm in a different way that we've been farming. And this has shown that it's not sustainable, that we can't continue on this path if we want to feed the world, if we want to have a healthier planet. We won't be able to sustain our livelihoods if we continue on this path.
It seems like, based on what Moby said earlier, sometimes we don't make change until we see catastrophe. It's a little, too late. With that said, and Moby, you've seen the trajectory of humanity and how we take action, or the lack thereof. How do you stay positive and motivated to continue fighting the good fight?
Do you want my honest answer?
I do.
It's potentially not very diplomatic, but my honest answer is, no matter what happens, the animals will benefit. Meaning, we have to, for humanity to survive, we have to figure out how to stop using animals for food. If we don't figure out how to stop using animals for food, humanity will go away and the animals will benefit. So the end result is a benefit for the animals either way, like either humanity learning to live, basically we need a vegan world. And I know a lot of times, especially like activists, advocates, there's the understanding that we sort of have to shy away from what is the baseline truth. And the baseline truth is, if the world does not become vegan, humanity, we're talking about a 2 degree centigrade temperature rise. What about 5 degrees? What about 7 degrees? What about 8 degrees? Which is really what we're on track for if we don't stop using fossil fuels and stop using animals for food. It's so simple. And unfortunately, like I had this conversation with Al Gore recently, there's this idea that like, oh, well, people aren't ready for radical change. But the problem being, radical change doesn't care. Radical change is coming whether people are ready for it or not. It's like someone who's addicted to crack smoking, you don't diplomatically say, oh, well, maybe at some point you might want to think about smoking less crack, because if they keep doing what they're doing, they will be destroyed. The same way our species, it's not diplomacy, it's not half measures. If we don't transition almost immediately to a world where we don't use fossil fuels and where we stop using animals for food, humanity will disappear. And I wish there was it's a horrifying statistic. It's horrifying, but it's also the truth. As Al Gore said, that's the real inconvenient truth.
If our trajectory is that we don't really act until we see palpably catastrophe, maybe we need to hear voices like yours a little bit louder and more succinctly. So thank you for your honesty and candor. We need to realize what that future looks like. And with that said, Dr. Sweta, what does the future look like if we can get our act together?
Well, it's our choice. That's the beauty of this, is that we know we're locked into warming. Let's just all collectively acknowledge that no matter what we do, we are going to be on a planet at a minimum 1.5 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels. That's what the Paris Accord said we should be maxing out with at the end of the century. We're actually still on the trajectory to meet that by mid-century. So we're currently on a path that gets us to at least 3 degrees if things don't really change by the end of that century, by the end of this century, right? So what that means for us is that tipping point where not only will humans begin to find it increasingly difficult to survive, the planet will just kind of shake us off. The planet will survive. We just may not be on it. I remember when Gina McCarthy said that to me at a conference. This was during the Trump administration, and bless her, she is now the domestic czar, climate czar. And so we have the right people in the administration to really, lead us through the change we need in the United States, so we can actually do at home what we're encouraging other countries to do in their own states. We need to not be seen as hypocrites, and we have the right people in place for that. So I have a lot of hope that there are the right leaders to really recognize that there's tough choices to be made, but it's better we invest and make those tough choices now than suffer the consequences of reaching that 3-degree or more warming that Moby just described by the end of the century. The planet will survive, a lot of animals will adapt, but we sure as hell won't be there to witness it or see it. So we want to avoid that. We want to avoid those worst case scenarios, and we really can. We can make this a future that is really thriving, not just people surviving, but truly one that is better air to breathe in, one where you don't have to worry about your children, how long they spend outside, and having just cleaner all around, an entire globe that is just that much more beautiful because the investment has been put forward to make it as such. I think if we keep our eye on the prize and keep that motivation that it can be a better one than we would have been on even if we weren't dealing with climate change, and we tell that story and we keep that positivity, now what we're looking at is real motivation for people to mobilize. And we know, as a behavioral scientist, we know that the way to capture people's attention is to scare them initially. We have to call climate crisis a crisis. We can go so far as to call it an emergency. It really is. Call it what it is. Get people's attention. We're in a saturated information landscape, and we have to break through the noise. People would rather stick their heads in the sand because it's easier that way. This is a much tougher reality to face. And if you're working all day in whatever your craft and your trade is, the last thing you want to do is come home and have to deal with the stress of an environment that is on fire. So that's how we're wired. We have to respect and understand that. That's human nature, and it's completely fine because we know that. So we can use that to our advantage. We can break through the noise. We can get inside people's heads in a way that is going to benefit them ultimately. So we get their attention by calling it a climate crisis, and then we provide positivity and hope and an ability to work together. One individual person feels that they won't be able to do it. They're not going to be able to make a dent in the problem. Well, look at us right now. We are from different walks of life completely. I never thought I would be on the same panel as Moby, who's had a very different career trajectory, or Dr. Michael Greger. How did we ever find each other in the same Zoom room? There's a reason. We have created collaborations. We have broken down our silos, and that is giving me personally hope. And I'm sure people who are listening to this recognize that there's a real promise and ability to be able to come together and work together. And you add one additional person, create a team, then add a third person, make it a group, and have that collective momentum to just continue to grow and tackle the challenges. Do what you can at your level, at an individual level, at a community level, and watch the ripple effects throughout the globe. There's so much promise in coming together as a collective humanity and addressing this climate crisis. I feel very, very positive and really energized to see it through.
Beautiful words. Thank you, Dr. Sweta. We're talking about a multi-prong problem with climate change, with renewable, sustainable energy. And it seems like a big source of that is what we spoke about earlier, the moratorium on potential factory farming and the dangers from that. Dr. Michael, obviously eating exotic wild animals or any animals is just generally bad for us and the planet. But veganism attrition rates are also alarming. What can we do?
Well, look, you don't have to eat vegan, right? Though no animals were harmed in the production of cultivated meat, right? It's still meat. People can have their meat and eat it too, but it's clean meat. No slaughterhouse pathogens, no slaughterhouses, period. No feedlots, no factory farms polluting poor communities, communities of color, and no pandemic risk, right? Maybe we don't need catastrophe, Moby. Maybe we just need some super delicious, safer products. In this new age of emerging disease, there are now billions of feathered and curly-tailed test tubes for viruses to mutate and incubate within billions more spins at pandemic roulette. You know, my book, How to Survive a Pandemic, all proceeds of which go to charity, I talk about how we may be one bushmeat meal away from the next HIV, one pangolin plate away from the next killer coronavirus, and one factory farm away from the next deadly flu. Along with human culpability, though, comes hope, right? If changes in human behavior can cause new diseases, well, then changes in human behavior may prevent them in the future. Yes, tragically, we don't tend to kind of shore up the levees until disaster strikes. And as Moby suggested, it may take a pandemic that wipes out millions before the world realizes the true cost of cheap chicken.
Yeah, that's great, wonderful points. And we're in the heart of that pandemic currently. And we're talking about how this may just be we haven't even scratched the surface. There could be future pandemics. A lot of this based on the issues around factory farming and some of the other topics that we're talking about. Jiliian, I'm curious, you're plant-based. Discuss how veganism has been for you.
Sure, yes. So I come from a Middle Eastern culture that, lamb and quail and chicken were, very prominent staples in our household. Throughout my entire life, we had meat. And it wasn't until about 2011 I had gone sick. And also I had family members who had heart disease, who died of heart attacks, and no one in my family ever talked about it. I did not have a heart attack, but when I was in the hospital, it made me rethink everything that I was putting in my body. I decided that I did not want any of that in my body. I was also working for USDA at the time, where I was visiting factory farms and recognized my environmental footprint. So for me, it was threefold. It was my health. I felt better immediately, and I never looked back. I feel great now. Visiting the farms, it was tragic to me. I never wanted to be part of that. And also knowing that what I was doing for the betterment of the planet also made me rethink and never want to go back to where I was in my life before. And for me, it's just, a lot of times people say, oh, well, don't you miss this or don't you miss that? No, I don't miss anything. My family still cooks with flavor. There's not a spice I don't have in my spice cabinet. There's not a curry I've met that's vegan that I don't like. I don't just eat lettuce. So I think there's this the stigma of what we eat, and it's just I have to say to people, no, it's none of those things. I love it. I love the way I feel. I love I love knowing that I'm doing this not just for the sake of my body, but for the sake of the planet as well. So yeah, it's been great for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jiliian. You've never met curry that you didn't fall in love with. I can attest to that as well. Moby, you're also a vegan, and check out that amazing neck tattoo. You are truly a committed vegan. What is your advice to those who want to make the transition to plant-based?
I think it's a wonderful question. It's hard for me to generalize, just because everyone is coming from a different perspective. I'm not quite sure Dr. Greger, I didn't know what you were doing. You're drinking. Yep. It's happy hour somewhere.
That is correct. So, what is that? That's an interesting color beverage.
Chai tea.
Oh, nice. Looks a lot more orange on Zoom. Like a Trump. So my advice, for example, if I was talking to my 75-year-old aunt who's interested in going vegan, my conversation with her might be very different than talking to my 15-year-old cousin. And as we've addressed here, everybody is compelled by different information. For some people, it's a love of animals. For some people, it's climate driven. For some people, it's health driven. For some people, it's sex driven. For some people, it's an interest in protecting disadvantaged communities. There's so many reasons. So I guess as a vegan activist, that is part of my job, and I would say our job is being super strategic in how we present information to people. You know, there's not a one size fits all, which unfortunately I think sometimes, and I've been guilty of this as well, is like sometimes as vegans, we think that if we scream about what's important to us, other people will respond well. And what I've found, if I scream at people, they tend to just go away until I stop screaming or until they can't hear me anymore. So I've had to learn, you know, like there are people who don't care about animals, but they care about health. They care about the climate. They care about water use. They care about topsoil. They, you know, and like, so as a result, I don't yell at them to care about animals because they don't. You know, I do remind them, you know, of all the horrifying statistics around the environmental impact of animal ag. So I think that's, I mean, for activists in general, like sometimes we can get so caught up in the passion of activism that we forget that our goal has to be effectiveness. You know, activism, it doesn't matter how I feel as an activist, it matters if I'm an effective activist. You know, if I'm effectively advocating for change, and part of that sometimes means being strategic and not screaming in people's faces.
That's such a good point. You know, activism is so important, and yeah, the passion is a big part of it. How do you convey that we could be on a catastrophic trajectory without that passion? But at the same time, when people ingest that energy, sometimes they tend to run away. So I'd love to kind of turn this into more of a popcorn mastermind at this point. What are some of the ways that we can spark viral conversation with each other and the young people, maybe activate more conversations on social media, which is the one vehicle that can really spark virality inside of a couple hours someday?
I will say idiomatically, viral conversation, we might want to think of a better expression.
True. I'll agree to that. I'd love to turn this into a mastermind. What can we do for the people who are listening today? What can we do to kind of help propel these conversations to the mainstream audience?
I'll kick off, and then I can throw the mic to Jillian next, maybe switch it up a little bit. We have a lot of tools in our toolkit, right? We've got science and technology innovations already here or in the pipeline. And we need to recognize that there is some serious research and development that is still required, because again, we can't predict exactly what scenarios we're going to be coming across. And we have to remember that a lot of this is a vicious feedback loop of climate, right? So as the Arctic ice melts, it begets more melting. And so that can speed up exponentially some of the different loops that will result in even faster warming and those worst case scenarios we've been talking about through this session. And because of that, we need to make sure that we have the research and development in the pipeline as well for if and when we need to utilize it. So the amount of money the US spends on innovative medical research is $35 billion. At least that needs to go into looking at maybe geoengineering solutions. They're not here and they're not a magic bullet, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about them. Cellular agriculture, the future of that Dr. Greger also mentioned. There's a lot of innovation rapidly happening, but we want to support that kind of industry as well, to give people the choices in the future to still enjoy what they have maybe culturally been prescribing to, but not at a detriment to the planet. So we need to reinforce and make our existing systems more resilient in the face of a rapidly warming planet, and also support investment. Now, how does the average person get involved in this and get excited about this? Well, become part of the conversation. Those tools that I'm talking about exist in terms of collaboration. So the group I work for, We Don't Have Time, is a free app to download. It's a social network that connects people that would never be able to be connected otherwise on the topic of climate and the many subcategories that people have deep interest in, whether it's around veganism, whether it's around cellular agriculture, whether it's around specifically changing factory farming, right? There's an even subcategories under food, that people can really find like-minded people that want to mobilize, come together and see their projects kick off and launch campaigns that maybe start virtual, but eventually have real life impacts. And that's what we need. We need to find community and we need to find collaboration. And we're seeing it happen even before COVID. We've seen the mobilization on the ground of the next generation, millennials and Gen Z. Imagine the power of that with the tools that we're offering them now to take it to not just those who get together in person outside of Swedish parliament, like we saw with Greta Thunberg, but actually come together in front of their laptops and do something massive. There's a lot of potential there and it's really exciting. Jiliian.
Yeah, I'll just build off of that, but also something that Moby said kind of stuck with me. I was a principal investigator on a report with Yale program on climate communication, where we looked at behaviors around plant-based diets and the environment to see if there was any correlation, if people cared at all. And what we did find is that there was a hunger, pun intended, for more information. And, you know, Moby, like you said, it varied, whether it was health motivated, whether it was environmental motivated. Everyone had different motivators. There were also a lot of barriers that we saw, whether it was price, whether it was taste. So, you know, when I think about activism and how folks can get more involved, it's going to vary for every single person. So have the conversations that are related to those specific people and what they are trying to kind of attest to. If you have communities of low income, they want to know how they can access more plant-based foods. You know, and there are organizations like Plantega who are part of that solution. So I think it's really taking a closer look at what it is that each of us as individuals, if it's our carbon footprint, what can we do in that regard? If it's for health, what can we do? It all goes back to animal agriculture, to be quite honest. It all goes back to eating animals. So however we frame that, if we choose to change the narrative we can make it what we want, but it all comes back to animal agriculture and how we need to take animals out of our system.
Dr. Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How would you approach this in terms of a solution-driven conversation? What do we need to do today for the audience who's watching and listening and may not be as well versed or educated as some of our panelists here today?
Yeah, well, you know, Jiliian brought up a really good point about chronic disease. Every one of us knows someone suffering from chronic disease like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease. And when she said that, the first thing I thought of, you know what those are? Those are all of the predisposing conditions for a severe course of COVID-19, right? These are all risk factors for a more severe case during the current pandemic. And every single one of those risk factors can be prevented, arrested, even reversed with a healthy enough plant-based diet. In fact, you don't even need to be obese. Just having a BMI of 28, which is like 175 pounds at the average American height, puts you nearly 6 times the risk of a severe course of COVID-19. You know what the average BMI in the United States? 29. So even being skinnier than your average American may put you at so much excess body fat to put you at significantly higher risk. And so, you know, this is the time to take better care of ourselves. You know, for many of us, this change in our lifestyle may have given us actually more control over our environment. No longer may we be, you know, walking past the donut shop or facing down the bowl of chocolates on our coworker's desk or cupcake celebrations in our schools or whatever it is. For those of us privileged enough to be able to stay home and take care of ourselves, this is the time to start that exercise regimen, to start that meditation practice, to clean out the pantry, to protect us not only now, during the current infectious threat, but against future chronic disease threats and to reduce the risk of climate catastrophe and reduce pandemic risk. They all come together. And so we can reach people out of their natural sense of compassion for themselves and their families. It's just win, 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 win.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Michael Gregory. You know, we spoke a little bit about, I guess, climate influencers like Greta. Who else can we listen to? Who can we follow? What orgs are doing it right? What movements are happening? Who else should we be following and supporting?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Who should we be supporting? And what's very unique about this type of activism is, like, traditionally issue-oriented activism lives in the philanthropic space. You know, it's overseen by 501c3s. And to be very clear, 501c3s are incredibly important. Those are nonprofit charitable organizations. But what's fascinating about this is the impact of products, you know, as Dr. Greger was alluding to earlier, and the impact of media. So when I think of sort of animal activism, and we'll call it climate animal activism, environmental animal activism, I see it as being almost like a pie where 501c3s, the charitable component, is a huge part of the pie, but products and media are almost equally as important. I mean, you think of a movie like What the Health, how many people that reached. You know, you think of the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger, those are now billion-dollar companies that are phenomenal activist tools. And so it's both challenging and exciting. To your earlier question of, like, basically, broadly speaking, what can we do? And what I would say is we can continue to do everything that we're doing, because there's so many ways of reaching people and so many ways of effectively changing the world. But one of the things we have to do individually and collectively is assess the effectiveness of our actions. You know, we can't keep doing things if they're not working, you know, and sometimes we lack the objectivity and perspective that enables us to assess what we're doing. And I really wish that we had some better sort of, I don't know, data set or metric generator that enabled us to see what are we doing that's actually significantly moving the needle.
Yeah, I have one thing to add to that. I mean, we have power in how we spend our money, right? The way that we spend our money is very telling on these markets. So, you know, we're seeing Oatly. We saw Oatly this week, you know, filed an IPO for 10, you know, valuing at $10 billion. If there's more demand for this, you're going to see a shift. You're going to see dairy farmers shift their operations to nut milk operations. So we have the power as consumers to use our dollars in a way that is going to better the environment, our bodies, and really, I mean, we're seeing everything from these chicken nuggets to Beyond, to Impossible, to Dr. Prager's. Like, there's so many different you know, different products out there that there's obviously a demand for it. And I know when I went vegan 8 years ago, it did not look like this when I walked into a grocery store. I didn't have, you know, 10 to 15 different, you know, yogurts that were non-dairy to choose from. I didn't have this many quote unquote meats to choose from. It's wild, and it really it's exciting, but we have the power as consumers to use our dollars and how we spend them.
That's a really interesting point. You know, as consumers, we have a collective power. At the end of the day, we live in a world incentivized by money, profits, margin at scale. And we're, you know, the big fight is against the financial interests of fossil fuel industry, of factory farming at scale. These are giant institutions that have been around a very long time. And the only thing that can fight that is demand, or the lack thereof, because that's what's going to really dictate that.
So can I interrupt for 1 second? Because
sure.
There is one massive variable that those of us in this community have been talking about for a long time, which is subsidies. You know, animal agriculture without subsidies doesn't exist. Fossil fuel industry without subsidies goes away tomorrow. So like all of us for years have been trying to figure out how do we challenge these subsidies? You know, whether it's the European Central Agricultural Policy, get rid of the subsidies, and so many of these problems kind of do just sort of go away.
So I've been a vegetarian over 20 years. I don't know what meat tastes like. I don't remember. And someone asked me, would I ever eat insect protein? And you know, what's kind of weird is I think I would. You know, I always thought I'm not going to eat something with a face on it or muscle tissue, but something about insects, as gross as it kind of seems to eat like raw, if it was like milled into a powder, I think I would be okay with it. What is everyone's thoughts on insect protein and sustainability? Is that a pathway forward in like replacing our protein needs as humans?
I'm pretty happy with black beans and brown rice. I don't necessarily need to eat a cockroach smoothie right now.
Moby, you don't want to go foraging with me for ants and crickets?
I'll bring my phone and document you foraging for ants and crickets, but if it's all right with you, I'll pass on actually eating them.
I'd love to hear from the other panelists. What are your thoughts on protein for a sustainable future?
Well, I mean, for me, I think that buys into this concept that somehow we are struggling with kwashiorkor as a society with protein deficiency. There's no shortage of abundant, healthy sources of protein without needing to start eating roaches. But I'd be curious for those here on the panel with their ties, both present and past, with politics. Here we are about a little over a month into the new administration, and I would love to hear from kind of an insider standpoint, what should we be hopeful? Is this what we were expecting to see happen? Are we disappointed? I want to know what's going on. I've pinned so many hopes, and I see good things happening in the pandemic response arena, but curious what we see in kind of the regulatory agriculture climate arena.
I'll say a few words and then I'll kick it off to you, Jules. So you need to join us in our clubhouse rooms, Michael. We kind of have these conversations on the regular. We might be able to even tempt Moby into coming onto the platform at some point. No, hard no. Okay. So what, we do talk about this because it's conversations in real time. As appointments are being made, we host different interest groups, activist groups, really, like the Hip Hop Caucus just yesterday we hosted with Reverend Yearwood to talk about how generally those he represents are feeling about where the administration's going. And it's been a resounding supportive response from many of these communities that we're really looking to send a signal to let us know how they feel so far that the administration is keeping in line to the platforms and the promises that it made leading up to the election. And we know the first 100 days is critical in any administration. And so the appointments are really key right in the beginning, and everyone's going to be watching really closely over the next few months. The appointments are on point and the executive orders really were supported and heralded by many of the groups that were looking to see exactly the action that he took to make environmental racism and justice really a core tenet. And I know Jiliian can get into that a little bit, but also making climate change central across agencies where it doesn't historically sit. Now we have climate change representatives really focusing in at Department of Transportation, Department of Interior. That's incredible. So to have this real effort to have a consistent message throughout government across agencies to right the wrongs of the past, and then to have somebody like a John Kerry, the first ever presidential climate envoy, to really represent the United States and not, do this 180 turn on what we experienced prior to the Biden administration. This gives us a lot of hope for the next 100 days really panning out as promised.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, so I do think that this that this administration is much more progressive than it was when Tom Vilsack was the secretary. And I feel like if he isn't going to make some pretty progressive, if you want to call it progressive, better decisions for the health and wealth of the animals and planet, then there's going to be trouble at the USDA. So I think we have to look towards the 2023 Farm Bill and what type of language we're putting in the 2023 Farm Bill. I worked on the Farm Bill before. I know the power of that. And now that the Dems do have both the House and the Senate, there's a lot of work that can be done, a lot of good work. But in terms, I will have to say, USDA for the first time is providing grant research for alternative protein through scientific R&D, like through programs, which is the first time it's ever happened. And also, I just want to say I believe it's the National Science Foundation was recently awarded $3.5 million to UC Berkeley for cultivated meat research, which is the first US government money to go towards that. So there are things that are happening. I'm not sure why it hasn't been mentioned in the media that much, but it's not like the media is going to cover that. But I am hopeful. I do think that there are folks in this administration that really want to do what's best for the planet, and they see regenerative agriculture being one of those solutions. They see alternative proteins being part of the research and development of what's to come. So I am hopeful. I wasn't, to be quite honest, at some point, but talking to some folks there, kind of going through a few things with the transition team, there is reason to have hope. And I do think with the next Farm Bill, we will see significant change.
You sort of touched on something that I've been frustrated by, but also interested in for quite a long time, is largely speaking, the lack of the progressive community to look at the role of animal agriculture in climate, in deforestation, in impact on disadvantaged communities. And I think it's sort of our responsibility to figure out how to better educate the progressive community, because the percentage, I'd say that hovering, it's around 98% of progressives still eat meat and dairy, which is the equivalent of 98% of progressives having Humvees just idling in the driveway while they're smoking cigarettes and beating their children. It's so inconsistent. Like, I opened the New Yorker, which has become basically the Mother Jones of the 21st century. And they'll have all these articles about climate and about community and about deforestation interspersed with articles about beef and bacon. And so somehow reminding the progressives that if you care about, if you care about workers, if you care about immigrants, if you care about the climate, if you care about the rainforest, if you care about your health, if you care about the future of the planet, you can't be actively contributing to this industry, which is animal agriculture.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. We're talking about the terrible trifecta of climate, COVID, and food with Jiliian Seamaan, Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, Dr. Michael Gregory, and the esteemed Moby. This has been amazing. Thank you all for joining us on a wonderful, insightful, and a profound conversation.
Well, thank you.
So glad to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.